The space station of Heir floated like a shining jewel above a blue and silver planet. It was a meeting place for many alien races, a place where treaties were signed and decisions for the future were made. For humans, who had only joined the Council of Species a few decades ago, it was still something new and intimidating. Tomasz stood near the tall glass walls of the council hall. He was young, only in his mid-twenties, and not a soldier or a politician. He was a technician, someone who fixed systems and made sure machines worked the way they should. Yet today, he had been chosen to represent Earth in a small cultural exchange. His leaders believed his calm personality and ability to listen would speak well for humans. He felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes watching him. Some of the taller species looked down at him with interest. Others whispered quietly, curious about this new human. Tomasz did not let it shake him. He stood straight, hands folded in front of him, his expression steady. Then the room grew silent. The doors at the far end opened, and Princess Alira entered. Alira was young, only 19 by her people's calendar, but she carried herself with the pride of someone raised in palaces and courts. She wore a long robe of silver fabric that shimmered under the light, and her crown was set with blue stones that glowed faintly. She was a royal of the Illyrians, one of the oldest and most respected civilizations in the stars. To her, humans were newcomers, rough and untested. She stepped into the hall, her chin raised. The courtiers bowed their heads, and whispers filled the air. Tomasz bowed slightly too, offering the respectful greeting his mentors had taught him. "Princess Alira," he said calmly, "on behalf of Earth, it is an honor to meet you." For a moment, the young royal simply stared at him. Then she tilted her head, her lips curving into a small, sharp smile. "Honor," she repeated softly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do humans know what honor is?" A faint laugh spread through the alien nobles. Tomasz did not move. His eyes stayed steady, not angry, not embarrassed, simply calm. "You are fragile creatures," Alira continued, her voice smooth but cold. "Your lives are short, your bodies weak. And yet, here you stand, pretending to be equal among those who have ruled the stars for centuries. Tell me what gives you the right." The words struck the hall like a spark. Some of the aliens lowered their eyes, uncomfortable. Others smirked, enjoying the boldness of the princess. Everyone turned to Tomasz, expecting him to defend his people with fiery words or to bow his head in shame. But Tomasz did neither. He looked at Alira for a moment. His expression did not change. Then, without a word, he gave the smallest of respectful bows, turned on his heel, and walked away from the circle of nobles. The hall was silent. The sound of his quiet footsteps echoed on the polished floor. Alira's smile froze on her lips. No one had ever walked away from her before. She was royalty. Every insult, every command she had given in her short life had been met with apologies, with fear, or with desperate attempts to please her. But this human, he said nothing at all. The silence felt heavier than any reply he could have given. The courtiers whispered again. Some frowned, confused. Some looked at Tomasz with new eyes. A few even felt admiration. The human had not fought with words. He had not lowered himself either. He had simply walked away. Alira's chest tightened with something she could not explain. Annoyance. Curiosity. A sense of being challenged without a single word spoken? She lifted her chin higher, trying to hide the sudden unease inside her. He is nothing, she told herself silently. Just a human. Just a newcomer. Yet as Tomasz disappeared into the corridor beyond the hall, she found her gaze following him. And for the first time, Princess Alira wondered if perhaps she had made a mistake. The rest of the court session carried on, but the atmosphere was different. Whispers of the moment passed through the nobles like ripples across water. The young human had done something no one else had dared to do, he had refused to play the royals' game. Tomasz, meanwhile, walked calmly down the quiet passage outside. He did not feel anger, nor did he feel shame. He knew what he represented: his people's patience, their will to endure, their ability to prove themselves not with words, but with actions. And actions, Tomasz believed, always spoke louder than insults. The space station of Heir floated like a shining jewel above a blue and silver planet. It was a meeting place for many alien races, a place where treaties were signed and decisions for the future were made. For humans, who had only joined the Council of Species a few decades ago, it was still something new and intimidating. Tomasz stood near the tall glass walls of the council hall. He was young, only in his mid-20s, and not a soldier or a politician. He was a technician, someone who fixed systems and made sure machines worked the way they should. Yet today, he had been chosen to represent Earth in a small cultural exchange. His leaders believed his calm personality and ability to listen would speak well for humans. He felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes watching him. Some of the taller species looked down at him with interest. Others whispered quietly, curious about this new human. Tomasz did not let it shake him. He stood straight, hands folded in front of him, his expression steady. Then the room grew silent. The doors at the far end opened, and Princess Alira entered. Alira was young, only 19 by her people's calendar, but she carried herself with the pride of someone raised in palaces and courts. She wore a long robe of silver fabric that shimmered under the light, and her crown was set with blue stones that glowed faintly. She was a royal of the Illyrians, one of the oldest and most respected civilizations in the stars. To her, humans were newcomers, rough and untested. She stepped into the hall, her chin raised. The courtiers bowed their heads, and whispers filled the air. Tomasz bowed slightly too, offering the respectful greeting his mentors had taught him. "Princess Alira," he said calmly, "on behalf of Earth, it is an honor to meet you." For a moment, the young royal simply stared at him. Then she tilted her head, her lips curving into a small, sharp smile. "Honor," she repeated softly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do humans know what honor is?" A faint laugh spread through the alien nobles. Tomasz did not move. His eyes stayed steady, not angry, not embarrassed, simply calm. "You are fragile creatures," Alira continued, her voice smooth but cold. "Your lives are short, your bodies weak. And yet, here you stand, pretending to be equal among those who have ruled the stars for centuries. Tell me, what gives you the right?" The words struck the hall like a spark. Some of the aliens lowered their eyes, uncomfortable. Others smirked, enjoying the boldness of the princess. Everyone turned to Tomasz, expecting him to defend his people with fiery words or to bow his head in shame. But Tomasz did neither. He looked at Alira for a moment. His expression did not change. Then, without a word, he gave the smallest of respectful bows, turned on his heel, and walked away from the circle of nobles. The hall was silent. The sound of his quiet footsteps echoed on the polished floor. Alira's smile froze on her lips. No one had ever walked away from her before. She was royalty. Every insult, every command she had given in her short life had been met with apologies, with fear, or with desperate attempts to please her. But this human, he said nothing at all. The silence felt heavier than any reply he could have given. The courtiers whispered again. Some frowned, confused. Some looked at Tomasz with new eyes. A few even felt admiration. The human had not fought with words. He had not lowered himself either. He had simply walked away. Alira's chest tightened with something she could not explain. Annoyance. Curiosity. A sense of being challenged without a single word spoken? She lifted her chin higher, trying to hide the sudden unease inside her. He is nothing, she told herself silently. Just a human. Just a newcomer. Yet as Tomasz disappeared into the corridor beyond the hall, she found her gaze following him. And for the first time, Princess Alira wondered if perhaps she had made a mistake. The rest of the court session carried on, but the atmosphere was different. Whispers of the moment passed through the nobles like ripples across water. The young human had done something no one else had dared to do, he had refused to play the royals' game. Tomasz, meanwhile, walked calmly down the quiet passage outside. He did not feel anger, nor did he feel shame. He knew what he represented: his people's patience, their will to endure, their ability to prove themselves not with words, but with actions. And actions, Tomasz believed, always spoke louder than insults. The council hall emptied slowly after the session. The nobles of different worlds moved in small groups, their robes brushing against the polished floor, their voices lowered but quick with excitement. What had just happened was unusual, and unusual things spread fast in royal courts. The young human, Tomasz, had not argued, had not begged, had not even replied to the sharp words of Princess Alira. Instead, he had walked away with quiet dignity. That silence became the only subject of conversation. "Did you see his face?" one courtier whispered. "So calm," another replied. "Almost too calm." As if her words meant nothing. "That in itself is dangerous," a third muttered. "To ignore a royal's insult is to strike her pride." The whispers carried weight. For the nobles, words were everything. Status, respect, and influence were tied to how one spoke. To respond with silence, what did that mean? Was it courage, or was it disrespect? Princess Alira sat at the far end of the hall, her silver robe pooling around her like a shining wave. Her expression was still composed, but her thoughts were restless. She replayed the moment again and again: the human's steady gaze, the slight bow, the quiet retreat. It unsettled her. Since childhood, Alira had been taught that her words were like commands. She had seen powerful warriors tremble at her sharp tongue, and even elders of other species had lowered their voices in her presence. But Tomasz, he had simply turned and walked away. Her pride told her to dismiss him. "He is nothing," she reminded herself. "Just a human." Yet the memory of that silence lingered in her chest like a weight she could not push aside. One of her advisors, an older alien named Siron, approached cautiously. "Princess," he said, bowing, "the human's action was unusual." Alira's eyes narrowed slightly. "Unusual, yes. But meaningless." "Perhaps not," Siron replied carefully. "Sometimes silence is sharper than any blade. Many are speaking of him already. They wonder what it means." Alira waved a hand, as though brushing his words away. "Let them wonder. He is only a technician, not a leader." But even as she spoke, her advisor's words echoed in her mind. Silence sharper than any blade. Elsewhere in the station, Tomasz returned to his quarters. The corridors were quieter here, far from the glittering chambers of the court. He sat down at his desk, unclipping the small tools he always carried at his belt. For him, fixing machines was easier than fixing misunderstandings between species. Yet he did not regret what he had done. He had seen in Alira's eyes the need to provoke, the expectation that he would argue or bow deeper. To Tomasz, feeding pride with more words only made it stronger. Walking away had been the only answer. A message light blinked on his console. He opened it to find a simple note from another human envoy: "Word of today's meeting spreads quickly. Some call it bravery. Some call it insult. Either way, you have been noticed." Tomasz sighed softly. Attention was not what he wanted, but he understood that sometimes choices carried consequences far beyond one's intent. Back in the grand hall, the whispers refused to fade. A group of nobles from a desert world spoke in low voices. The human showed no fear. I expected him to stammer, to defend himself. Yet he did not. Could it be arrogance, one asked. Or strength, another suggested. The debate spread like fire. By the time the evening light dimmed across the station's glass walls, nearly every noble had formed an opinion about the human technician. Alira listened from her seat but spoke little. She wanted to appear above such gossip, but in truth, every word about Tomasz reached her ears like a spark to dry grass. Her pride burned, yet something else stirred an unease she could not name. That night, as she walked through the royal quarters, her thoughts remained restless. Why had she even cared about a single human's reaction? Why had his silence felt heavier than the loud praises she often received? She paused by a window, staring at the stars beyond. "He is nothing," she whispered to herself again. But the words sounded weaker each time she repeated them. Meanwhile, Tomasz spent the evening repairing a damaged energy regulator deep within the station's machinery. He worked quietly, hands steady, mind calm. For him, actions mattered more than reputation. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, he sensed that the small moment in the hall was not finished. He had not spoken a single word in reply to Princess Alira's insult. But sometimes, silence does not end a conversation, it begins one. And on the star station of Heir, the conversation had only just begun. The station of Heir, though beautiful from the outside, was a place that needed constant attention. Hundreds of systems kept the massive structure alive: air filters, power grids, and energy shields. For most nobles, these details were invisible, something left to workers and technicians. But Tomasz understood that the station was like a giant heart. If even one artery failed, the whole body could fall. Several days after the tense meeting with Princess Alira, the first signs of trouble appeared. Lights flickered strangely in one wing of the council building. A cooling system failed in the lower quarters, forcing many residents to leave their rooms. Rumors began to spread: was it poor maintenance, or something worse? Tomasz was already deep in the mechanical levels when the alarm started. His tools clinked at his belt as he hurried down the narrow passageways, the hum of failing circuits echoing around him. He worked with steady hands, sealing leaks and rerouting energy lines. Around him, other workers looked shaken. "The failures are spreading," one muttered nervously. "It's like someone is pulling wires on purpose." Tomasz said nothing. He simply handed the worker a tool and pointed to the next system. Panic never fixed a machine. Action did. Above, in the higher levels, the nobles were far less calm. The glittering halls filled with worried voices. "This is sabotage," one declared. "Who would dare attack Heir?" Princess Alira listened from her seat at the round table. Her advisors argued in circles, their voices sharp and full of fear. She tapped her fingers lightly against the polished surface, her thoughts wandering to the quiet human who had walked away from her insult. Where is he now? She wondered suddenly. Hiding? Or working? As if in answer, Siron, her elder advisor, entered with news. "Princess," he said, bowing, "the human Tomasz is already in the lower levels, leading repairs. Reports say he has gathered a small team and is keeping them steady." A flicker of surprise crossed Alira's face. She quickly hid it, but her chest tightened with something unfamiliar. Respect. Curiosity. "He is a technician," she said lightly. "Of course he repairs. It is his duty." "Perhaps," Siron replied carefully, "but not all technicians can keep calm under pressure. Many are panicking." "He does not." Alira fell silent. Down in the humming chambers, Tomasz crouched beside a glowing console. Sparks spat from damaged circuits as he worked quickly, directing two younger workers to hold tools steady. "Breathe," he told them calmly. "Do not rush. Machines respond best to patience." His voice was low but steady, and it carried more weight than shouts. The workers relaxed a little, focusing on their tasks. Piece by piece, the systems began to stabilize. Then came another tremor. The floor shook, and the lights flickered. Someone shouted, "The energy grid is failing." Tomasz stood, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked at the frightened faces around him. "Follow me," he said simply. Without speeches, without fear, he led them down another corridor, toward the main energy chamber. His steps were firm, and his silence carried an odd kind of strength. The workers followed without hesitation. In the observation deck above the chamber, Princess Alira arrived with her guards. She had insisted on seeing the crisis for herself, despite her advisors' protests. From the glass wall, she watched as Tomasz moved below with his small group, guiding them through smoke and sparks. He did not bark orders. He did not boast. He only pointed, lifted, fixed, yet every person listened to him as though he were a commander. Alira pressed a hand lightly to the glass, her eyes narrowing. "This is the man I called fragile? This is the human I dismissed?" One of her guards muttered, "Strange. Even our trained officers do not hold such control under fire." Alira did not answer. Minutes later, Tomasz and his team managed to stabilize the failing energy core. The trembling stopped, the light steadied, and a sigh of relief spread through the workers. "Good work," Tomasz said simply, giving each of them a small nod. There were no grand celebrations, no speeches. Only the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. From above, Alira continued to watch. She felt something stir deep inside her, conflict between pride and respect. She wanted to dismiss him again, to remind herself that humans were new and weak. Yet her eyes had seen otherwise. When Tomasz finally looked up, his gaze met hers across the glass wall. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Tomasz gave the smallest nod, not of submission, but of simple acknowledgement. Alira's chest tightened. She quickly turned away, her silver robe swirling around her. "Enough," she said sharply to her guards. "We are leaving." But as she walked back through the shining halls, her mind refused to let go of the image of the silent human, guiding others with calm strength. For the first time, Princess Alira began to wonder if perhaps silence itself could be a kind of power. The station had grown quieter after the crisis was controlled, but unease still lingered in every hall. Repairs had been made, yet everyone knew the failures had not been accidents. Somewhere within Heir, unseen hands had worked against them. In the council chamber, the nobles argued once again. Some demanded stronger patrols. Others whispered that rival factions were behind the sabotage. The air was thick with blame and fear. Princess Alira sat silently, her eyes distant. She could still see the image of Tomasz in her mind, a human standing calmly in the middle of fire and smoke, guiding workers without panic. She had told herself again and again that humans were fragile, but the memory refused to bend to her pride. Her thoughts were interrupted when the council doors opened with a sudden clang. A group of tall, armored aliens entered. Their dark uniforms marked them as members of the Xyrith faction, a rival power that had long despised Alira's family. "Forgive our late arrival," their leader said with a mocking bow. His voice was smooth but heavy with contempt. "We heard there was trouble in your perfect station." The courtiers stiffened. The Xyrith were known for their sharp tongues and ruthless ways. They had not caused the sabotage openly, but their sudden appearance felt like an insult. The leader's eyes swept the room and landed on Tomasz, who stood quietly near the side wall, listening but saying nothing. "And this," the Xyrith leader sneered, "is the human everyone whispers about? The one who repairs pipes and carries tools?" Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Alira felt a surge of heat rise in her chest, though she did not know if it was anger at the Xyrith or something else entirely. Tomasz did not respond. His gaze was steady, calm, as if the insult had passed through him like air. The Xyrith leader smirked. "Tell me, human. When the stars burn and the halls fall, will you fight with words of silence? Or will you crawl back to your little planet?" Still, Tomasz said nothing. He only adjusted the small tool at his belt, as if preparing for work, not argument. His silence filled the hall once again, heavier than shouting could have been. For a moment, the council chamber grew tense. Some nobles looked at Tomasz with doubt, others with admiration. Alira clenched her fists beneath the table. His silence frustrated her, yet she could not deny that it unsettled their enemies more than any reply might have. The Xyrath leader laughed. "Pathetic," he declared. But his laugh was too loud, too forced, as though hiding discomfort. Then he turned to Alira with a mocking smile. "Is this the kind of protector your people trust? A man who cannot even speak." Alira lifted her chin, her silver crown catching the light. She wanted to reply sharply, to cut him down with her words. Yet when she glanced at Tomasz, still standing silent and calm, something stopped her. Instead, she said coldly, "Do not mistake silence for weakness." The Xyrath leader's smile faltered just slightly. His eyes narrowed, but he said no more. With a sharp gesture, he and his group turned and left the hall, their footsteps echoing. Later that evening, Tomasz returned to the lower levels to continue repairs. But the memory of the Xyrath's words lingered. He had faced insults before, first from Alira, now from enemies, but he knew actions would matter more than anything spoken. As he worked, several younger workers approached him. "We followed you during the crisis," one said. "We trust you. What do we do if the Xyrath try again?" Tomasz looked at them quietly. He did not give long speeches. Instead, he placed a hand on the console and said simply, "We keep the station alive. That is our answer." The workers nodded, finding strength in his calm certainty. In her private chambers, Princess Alira paced back and forth. She had replayed the council scene in her mind again and again. She remembered how Tomasz's silence had turned the Xyrath leader's mockery into unease. For the first time, she understood that words were not the only weapon. Silence, when held with dignity, could shift the ground beneath even the proudest adversary. Yet the realization stung her pride. She had insulted him once, dismissing him as fragile. Now she saw he was more than she had allowed herself to believe. Her advisor Siron entered quietly. "Princess," he said, "the Xyrath grow bold. But today, it was not your words that unsettled them. It was the human." Alira stopped pacing, her silver robe brushing the floor. She looked toward the stars beyond the wide window. "Yes," she whispered. "The human." For the first time, her voice carried no mockery. Only curiosity. The station of Heir slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Lights glowed steadily again, the air systems hummed smoothly, and the council chambers filled once more with voices discussing politics and trade. Yet beneath the polished surface, something had changed. The nobles who once ignored the human technician now spoke of him in quiet tones. Some admired his calm strength. Others still doubted him, but even they could not deny the effect his silence had left. What was once seen as weakness was now spoken of as something rare: dignity under pressure. Princess Alira felt the change more than anyone. Everywhere she walked, she heard whispers. "The human," they said, "does not bend." At first, she tried to dismiss it, telling herself such talk would fade. But it did not. It grew, following her like a shadow. One evening, unable to quiet her thoughts, Alira left the upper halls and walked down into the lower levels. The corridors here were not polished like the royal chambers. They were lined with humming pipes and glowing panels, smelling faintly of oil and energy. She rarely visited this part of the station, but something drew her forward. She found Tomasz in one of the service rooms, crouched beside an open console. Sparks flickered as he worked, his steady hands moving with practiced ease. Around him, a few younger workers assisted, watching him closely, learning as he explained with simple gestures. Alira stood at the doorway for a moment, watching silently. He did not notice her at first. There was nothing grand about him, no crown, no robe, no titles. And yet, the way the workers listened to him, the way he carried himself, made her chest tighten strangely. Finally, Tomasz glanced up. His eyes met hers briefly, and then he gave a small nod. "Princess," he said calmly, before turning back to the console. No bow. No nervous chatter. Just a simple greeting, as though she were anyone else. Alira stepped into the room, her silver robe brushing the floor. The workers quickly bowed, but Tomasz only moved aside slightly to make space. "What brings you here?" he asked. His tone was polite, but not submissive. "I wanted to see the repairs," Alira replied, folding her hands in front of her. "I hear you have been keeping the station steady." Tomasz adjusted a wire and closed the panel. "We keep it steady together," he said. "No one repairs a station alone." His words were simple, but they unsettled her. Nobles often claimed victories as their own. Yet he gave credit to everyone. It was so different. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The workers glanced nervously, unsure if the princess and the human should even be speaking. But Alira held her place. "You, do not speak much," she said finally. Tomasz looked at her, his gaze steady. "Words are easy. Actions are harder. I prefer the harder path." The answer struck her like a quiet blade. She remembered the council hall, her insult, and his silent retreat. At the time, she had seen it as defiance. Now she wondered if it had simply been strength. Before she could reply, an alarm rang faintly in the distance. The workers tensed, ready to move, but the sound quickly faded, only a minor fluctuation in the system. Still, the moment reminded them all that danger could return at any time. Tomasz stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at Alira again, not with hostility, but with the same calmness as always. "If you ever wish to see how the station truly lives," he said quietly, "come here. The heart of Heir is not in the halls of nobles. It is here, where things keep moving." Alira did not reply at once. She felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had lived her whole life among crowns and courts, believing that power rested in titles and commands. But this human spoke of power as something simpler, keeping things alive, holding people steady. When she finally left the service room, she walked slower than before. For the first time in her life, she had not been treated as untouchable royalty. Tomasz had looked at her as though she were simply another person standing before him. And strangely, instead of anger, she felt something she had never expected. Respect. That night, in her private chamber, Alira stood before the wide glass window. Stars glimmered in the distance, endless and cold. Her reflection stared back at her, crown resting on her head, silver robe glowing faintly in the starlight. She whispered softly to herself, "Perhaps silence is not weakness. Perhaps it is strength I never learned." The thought unsettled her, yet it also lit a small spark of curiosity in her heart. For the first time, the proud princess of the Illyrians was no longer thinking of herself alone. She was thinking of a human, a man whose silence spoke louder than words, whose actions carried weight without demand. And deep within her, she knew something had shifted. The station of Heir seemed calm again. The council carried on with its endless talks, merchants filled the markets, and nobles returned to their routines. Yet under the calm surface, danger still moved in shadows. Tomasz continued his work quietly in the lower levels. To him, every hum of the machines was a sign of life. He checked power grids, adjusted cooling systems, and trained younger workers to respond without panic. He never raised his voice, never demanded recognition. For Tomasz, keeping the station alive was enough. But calm never lasted long. Late one evening, when the glass walls of the upper halls glowed faintly with starlight, an alarm burst through the air. This time, it was not a minor system failure. Explosions echoed from the docking bays, shaking the ground. Red lights flared in every corridor. The station trembled as if struck by an unseen hand. Shouts filled the noble halls. Guards rushed to secure the royal family. And in the center of the chaos was Princess Alira, her silver robe sweeping the floor as her attendants pulled her toward safety. Another explosion thundered, closer this time. The lights flickered, and smoke filled the air. Alira stumbled, her heart pounding. For the first time, she felt the raw fear that ordinary workers often lived with. Then, through the smoke, a steady figure appeared to Mosh. His face was calm, his steps firm, as though the fire and chaos around him were no more troubling than sparks from a broken wire. "Come," he said simply, reaching her side. Before Alira could protest, another blast shook the corridor. A falling beam crashed down, sparks flying. Without hesitation, Tomash pulled her away, shielding her with his own body as debris clattered around them. Alira gasped, staring at him in disbelief. He had risked himself without a word, without thought. Not because she was a princess, but because she was someone in danger. He gave no speech, no reassurance. Only firm instructions. This way. Keep low. Do not stop. And somehow, his quiet words carried more weight than the panicked cries of a dozen guards. They moved through smoke-filled passages, Tomash leading, Alira following. Guards tried to take over, shouting directions, but soon they found themselves falling into Tomash's rhythm. His silence calmed them, his steady gestures guiding them more than any command. At one point, they reached a sealed door. Alira's guards argued about how to open it, voices rising in fear. Tomash stepped forward, crouched by the panel, and with swift movements of his tools, forced the door open. He said nothing, only moved aside so the others could pass. Alira followed him through, her chest tight. She realized then what she had never admitted before: silence could be a shield, a guide, even a command. As they entered a safer corridor, the sound of pursuing attackers echoed behind them. Shadows moved at the far end of the hall. The Zirath. One of the guards drew his weapon, trembling. "We can't fight them all." Tomash looked at Alira. His eyes held no fear, only resolve. He pointed to a side passage. "This way." They ran, the sound of footsteps chasing them. Tomash stayed near Alira, shielding her whenever the station shook. He never once shouted, never once spoke of fear. His silence itself gave her strength. Finally, after what felt like endless turns, they reached a secure chamber where emergency shields locked into place. The Zirath footsteps faded behind the thick barriers. For the moment, they were safe. Alira leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling quickly. Smoke clung to her robe, and her crown was tilted slightly. She looked at Tomash, who stood nearby, adjusting a panel to reinforce the shield. His face was streaked with dust, but his eyes were as calm as ever. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You saved me." Tomash gave a small nod, as if it were nothing. "You are safe now." Alira stared at him. So many had bowed to her with endless words, praising her status, promising loyalty. Yet it was this human, silent, steady, unshaken, who had truly protected her when it mattered. For the first time in her life, Alira felt humbled. She lowered her gaze. "I thought silence was weakness," she admitted softly. "But I was wrong." Tomash said nothing in reply. He only gave her a small, calm look, then turned back to check the systems. His silence, once more, said everything. When the danger finally passed, and news spread that the attack had failed, the nobles praised the guards, the shields, the council. But among the whispers, one truth spread more quietly, that it was a human who had stood steady, guiding even the princess through fire. and in Princess Alira's heart, the lesson was clear. Silence was not emptiness. Silence was strength. The station of Heir slowly returned to its normal rhythm once more. Repairs were complete, the systems hummed steadily, and alarms no longer pierced the calm air. The council resumed its meetings, and the nobles carried on with their polished discussions. Yet something had changed in the halls of power. Whispers of the human technician, Tomasz, continued to spread. Every noble and visitor who had witnessed his calm strength during the recent crisis spoke of it quietly. Not as a rumor, but as a truth that could no longer be ignored. Princess Alira walked through the grand halls, her silver robe trailing lightly on the floor. She paused at a large window, looking out at the stars beyond. They were endless, distant, beautiful, but they no longer felt untouchable. She had learned that even something small, even a single human, could influence the flow of events in ways she had never imagined. Tomasz appeared in the corridor below, moving quietly among the engineers. He did not carry himself with pride, and he did not seek attention. Yet everyone moved with respect around him, following his guidance, trusting his judgment. Alira descended to the lower levels, her curiosity stronger than her pride. She wanted to see him again, not as a princess demanding respect, but as someone who wished to understand. She found him checking the energy panels near the main chamber. Sparks flickered faintly as he worked, but his hands were steady, precise, confident. He noticed her at the doorway and gave a small nod. No bow, no words of greeting, only acknowledgement. "You continue your work even after everything," she said softly, stepping closer. "Do you ever stop?" Tomasz glanced at her, then back at the console. "The station never stops," he said quietly. "Neither should those who care for it." Alira watched him, studying his calm face, the quiet way he moved among the humming machinery. In that moment, she understood something she had never realized before: strength was not always loud. Courage did not always announce itself. And leadership was not always proven through words or status. She thought back to the first time she had insulted him in the council hall, mocking humans as weak and fragile. Back then, she had expected him to argue, to beg, to defend himself. But he had turned and walked away. That single act of quiet dignity had stayed with her longer than any argument she could have delivered. "You have taught me something," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Tomasz paused, finally looking directly at her. His gaze was steady but calm, as if measuring whether her words were sincere. He said nothing. Alira smiled faintly. It was a small, humble smile, different from the proud expression she usually wore in public. She took a step closer. "I was wrong to insult you," she admitted. "I thought words were the only way to show strength. But I see now, actions, patience, and courage are stronger than any words." Tomasz gave a slight nod, acknowledging her words without comment. That was enough. For the first time, Alira realized that she did not need him to say anything. His silence, his calm presence, and the way he had faced danger without fear had already taught her everything. The workers around them moved quietly, leaving space for the princess and the human. They understood, without being told, that something important was happening here. Alira straightened her shoulders, feeling a sense of humility she had never known. Her crown felt lighter on her head, and for the first time, she did not need it to define her power. Tomasz had shown her that true strength could exist in anyone, regardless of their status, species, or age. As she turned to leave, she looked back one last time. Tomasz continued his work, calm and steady, silent and strong. The sight stayed with her, an image she would carry for the rest of her life. In the council chambers, the nobles would continue to speak of battles, alliances, and treaties. But among those who had truly watched, a quiet truth had spread: humans, though new to the stars, carried a strength beyond expectation. Not all battles were won by words or weapons. Some were won by patience, by courage, and by the quiet, steady will to act when it mattered most. Alira stepped into the sunlight streaming through the station's upper windows. For the first time, she did not feel alone among the stars. She had learned humility. She had learned respect. And she had learned that a single human silent, calm, and courageous could teach a lesson that words alone never could. Tomasz looked up from his work once more, noticing her gaze. He gave the faintest nod and turned back to the panels. No one needed words between them. Silence had said everything. And in that silence, both the princess and the human understood one unshakable truth: the strength of a person was measured not by what they claimed, but by what they could quietly achieve when it truly mattered.